everyone. What a wonderful crowd we've got here. Thank you all for coming out. My name is Matt LaFlamme, and I'm the National Deputy Field Director for the Kennedy for President campaign and the next President of the United States, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I'd like to recognize our State Director here, Jared Bowles, our State Coordinator, Laureen Dumichel, our Volunteer Coordinator, who's Will Smith, our Field Leader, Jason Harper. And we've got plenty of county leads who I'd also like to recognize who are here tonight. We have Andrew Vanderbo, who represents the capital area. In the Newego and the Muskegon County area, we've got Patrick Bradley. Lapeer County, and excuse me if I'm butchering your county names here, guys, I'm from Maine. Lapeer County, we've got Sandra Schmidt. In Kent County, we've got Laura Jacob. In Emmett County, we've got Nancy Sherman. In Wayne County, we've got Afton Colleton. In Oakland County, we've got Daryl Johnson. In Royal Oak City, we've got two captains, Kath Husler and Phil Lease. And I'd also like to recognize Lisa Rod and Nicole Abador for making the volunteer badges for tonight. Thank you, guys. And now, I'd like to introduce the Traverse County leader, Beth Roberts.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome to today's community town hall meeting with meet and greet with presidential candidate, sorry, I'm nervous. Candidate Mr. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. It's great to see all of you here, and I love the enthusiasm. This is wonderful. As he said, my name is Beth Roberts, and I am the volunteer lead for Grand Traverse and Leelanau counties. I was raised in a small, very democratic family and have voted as such most of my life. As late, I, like many of you, I'm sure, have become increasingly disillusioned with the political system in our country, feeling disempowered as our tax dollars are wasted on foreign wars and furthering corporate interests, all the while not helping American families. That isn't how now. Mr. Kennedy first came to my attention during the height of the COVID crisis. His perspective was an informed, fact-filled, and welcomed one, and a beacon of light during murky times. When I heard the announcement that he was going to run for president, I was beyond thrilled. Each time I listen to him speak, I find just another reason why I'm positive he is the best and the only real choice for our country. Just a couple of my reasons. Mr. Kennedy's long and impressive career as an environmental lawyer, working to ensure that we have clean water, air, and food for our families in the future. His refreshing and inspiring commitment to transparency in government and telling the American people the truth. That he has concrete plans for economic reform and to secure our borders. And last but not least, his sincere desire to unite this country and heal the divide. I am sure we will all feel even more inspired after listening to Mr. Kennedy speak in person today. Please remember, we're not in this to win a fight. We're working towards a common goal to bring a life-affirming, inclusive, and supportive new era to this country and all of its citizens. I am humbled and honored to introduce our next President of the United States. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Beth, for that introduction, and thank all of you for making your way out here today. I'm very, very happy to be in Traverse County, and I'm happy all of you came out. This is an amazing crowd. And by the way, afterwards, we're going to do some Q&A. And then we're going to do a selfie line, so I'm going to take selfies with anybody who wants. It seems insurmountable because the crowd is big, but we have a system, and the other day we did in Charlotte, North Carolina or South Carolina, we did 600 people in 24 minutes. So we can get people out, but everybody has to kind of cooperate and keep moving and have your cameras ready. I went the campaign 3 weeks ago, took me to San Francisco, and I spent the better part of a year in San Francisco in 2018. Can everybody hear me in the back? Right. I spent the better part of the year in San Francisco in 2018. And because I was trying the Monsanto cases there, we tried 3 cases, one after the other, in front of 2 different judges. And so every day before court, I would go down to Union Square to go to the gym. And Union Square is, for San Francisco, it's like Fifth Avenue to New York. It's the big shopping center. People come from all over the world to visit it. It has all the American brands like Nordstrom's and Bloomingdale's and Macy's and Gap and Old Navy and Levi. And it has the big foreign brands like De La Valle and Prada and Gucci and Burberry and Ferragamo and every store that you can imagine. I went back 3 weeks ago and all of those stores are closed, and it's just acre after acre of plywood. And it's extraordinary for me to see the destruction of a city that was my favorite city in this country, and arguably the most beautiful city in the country. And the reason all those stores are closed is because of the chaos in the streets from the homeless population. And so when I left San Francisco, I began doing a lot of research on the homeless to figure out why is it we have 525,000 homeless people in this country, but half the unsheltered homeless are in California, which only has 12% of the population. So why is that? My assumption was that homelessness was related to drug addiction, it was related to mental illness, to extreme poverty. I also kind of had this assumption that people who become homeless elsewhere, like in Detroit or New York, and they don't want to spend the winter on the grates, that it would make sense that they would go to San Francisco. San Francisco, everybody knows, has a very welcoming social service system. I had also heard that certain cities like Dallas and Austin, that the police, when they pick up homeless people, instead of bringing them to a jail, they put them on a Greyhound to San Francisco one-way ticket. And people in San Francisco used to say that a lot too. But I started researching it, and my son Connor introduced me to a researcher and writer called Matthew Desmond, who's written kind of the seminal books on homelessness, including a very important book called Evicted. And he actually worked with the University of San Francisco and went out and did questionnaires with all the homeless in San Francisco. And what he found was that the people who are homeless in San Francisco, almost all of them came from San Francisco. They weren't imports. They were people who had homes in San Francisco and then lost them. And that mental illness and drug addiction, extreme poverty have very little to do with homelessness. There's more poverty in Detroit. There's more drug addiction in Detroit. There's more drug addiction and poverty, much more in West Virginia, and yet they don't have the homelessness problems like in San Francisco. And what Desmond says is that 100% of the problem of homeless, virtually 100%, is the price of housing. And California has the highest priced housing in the country. The average cost of a house in LA is $800,000, which means in order to own a house, you have to make $250,000 a year. And so what Desmond says, this epidemic of homelessness that they have in San Francisco is about to roll across the country like a tsunami, because the price of the cost of housing is rising so dramatically. And this state used at one point, when it was at the apex of the automobile industry and everything, had the highest ratio of single-family homes to residents of any state in our country. And it's important to have home ownership, because if you, as opposed to renting, if you own a home, you care about the community, you care about your police, you care about your hospitals, you care about your education system, you care about the appearance of your home, you care about your neighbors. And it gives you also it gives you an entree to the capitalist system, because if you own a home, you own equity, which means you can borrow money. So if you have an entrepreneurial impulse, you can go out and you can bet your home on it. You can buy something small like a sewing machine, or you can build a restaurant or retail outlet, and you have access to capital. And there was a period in American history that is called economists call the Great Prosperity, that began immediately after World War II, when the American middle class became the greatest economic generator, the engine in the history of mankind. When I was a boy, our country owned half the wealth on earth, and it was because the middle class, and that great prosperity was kicked off by the GI Bill and a number of other pieces of legislation that made it so most Americans could get their own home. And that, and it fortified our democracy, and it made us a very wealthy country. And now we're going in the opposite direction. So the average cost of a home in this country 2 years ago was $215,000. 2 years ago. The cost of a home today is over $400,000. And the interest rates have gone from 3 to 7%. So that home now costs 4 or 5 times what it did 2 years ago. I have 7 children. My eldest, who's 39, has a home. And he beat this tsunami. But the younger ones aren't even, none of them and none of their friends are thinking of buying a home. When I was their age, people were strategizing at that time, how do we get a home? How am I going to afford a home? This generation, we've broken the big promise. The promise of the American dream, the central promise, was that if you worked hard, if you played by the rules, you could finance a home, you could raise a family, you could have a summer job, a summer vacation, and you could put something aside for retirement. And on one job, on a single job. So there's nobody in my kids' generation that believes that promise is good to them, that it's going to work out. They're worried about paying their student loans. And the chance of them getting in a home is just, is very, very low. So why is this happening? Of course, inflation is affecting everything. And we know what the inflation comes from. It comes from spending $8 trillion that we didn't have on wars for the past 20 years. Now they're printing the money to pay for the wars, to pay $16 trillion for the lockdowns, and that money they don't have the courage to come and ask us for it through taxes. So they do a stealth tax, which is called inflation. But homes are going up faster than inflation, much faster. So why is it? It's because 3 giant corporations, Blackrock, State Street, and Vanguard, have now, and one of their subsidiaries, Blackstone, which is co-owned by Blackrock and State Street, those 3 companies own 88% of the S&P 500. So they own the business of America. And they've now decided that they want to own the farmland and the residential housing, including the single-family homes. And they've already bought up approximately 5%. If we stay on this trajectory, within 6 years, they'll own 40 to 60%. And we're going to become a nation of renters. and it's driving the price of the rents up too. But if you're a nation of renters, you go from being citizens to subjects. It is a colonial model. It's a feudal model like the one that we fought the revolution to get away from, where the oligarchy owns everything. And we are living by their courtesy on like serfs in our land. And so that these companies are now targeting that. Now I'm running against two presidents who both are running on the idea that they've brought great prosperity to this country. They've each served 4 years consecutively in office. And I spent a lot of time with regular Americans. And I did this, I've been doing that for the last 6 months, so I've been running, but I've been doing it my whole career. This is what I'm representing right now, 1,000 families in Columbiana County, Ohio, who in East Palestine and other areas whose lives were upended by the Norfolk Southern spill. I represented, until recently, 10,000 families in Tennessee who were poisoned by zinc from a lead smelter. I represent another 10,000 on the Ohio, West Virginia, along the Ohio River, who were poisoned by PFOAs from the DuPont plant. And I spend a lot of time sitting at kitchen tables with people and talking to them about their lives. And if you tell them, most Americans today, that they are in the midst of a great prosperity, they think they're being gaslighted. Because nobody feels like that. People feel that the system is disintegrating. And they feel like their lives that they're disintegrating, not just economically, but mental health and physical health, and in all these communities are being torn apart in all these different ways, and that they're living, a lot of them are living paycheck to paycheck at the edge of desperation. The average income in America today is $5,000 less than the cost of basic human needs of food, transportation, and housing. That means if you get the bare minimum of food, transportation, and housing, the average American is $5,000 in debt at the end of the year. And what are they doing? How are they handling that $5,000 deficit? Well, they're putting it on their credit cards. So 3 weeks ago, we passed an extraordinary milestone, which was $1 trillion in personal credit card debt in this country. By far the highest it's ever been. In the last 3 years, it's gone up 330 billion. And they're paying 22% interest on that debt. Oh, if the mafia did that, it would be called loan sharking and they'd go to prison. But if Visa, MasterCard, Wells Fargo, Citibank, Chase, Morgan, if they do that, it's just business as usual. And who do you think owns all of those businesses? Every one of them. Blackrock, State Street, and Vanguard. So they're strip mining the wealth from the American public. During the pandemic, we shut down for 3 years. We shut down 3.3 million businesses without due process, without just compensation. They were just told to close down. But the business that wasn't was Amazon. So we all got it 3-year lesson. We created the pandemic shifted $4 trillion in wealth from the American middle class to this new generation of billionaires, this new oligarchy. We created in 500 days during the lockdowns, we created a billionaire a day, 500 new billionaires. And Amazon was probably, one of the greatest beneficiaries of it. And Amazon, ironically, was, I did a book, not the Fauci book, but another one with Joe Mercola, criticizing the lockdowns, and Amazon censored that book. Oh, Amazon was censoring critics of a government policy from which it was profiting by billions. We all got a lesson on how to learn how to use Amazon. I didn't know how to use Amazon prior to the pandemic. And it's magical. It is. You find a picture of something you like and you hit a button and it's in your driveway the next day. So, but there's a cost to that, and the cost is the local retailer. 41% of Black-owned businesses will never reopen. Some of those had 3 generations of equity in them. And the local retailers who paid taxes in this community are gone. Oh, these are the guys. This is, the guy who hired your kid during summer vacation. This is the guy who had a plaque on his wall from the local Boy Scout troop thanking him for supporting them. It's the guy who paid for your kids' Little League uniforms and their hockey jerseys. And they're gone now. So, but at least Amazon's paying local taxes, right? Right, no, it isn't. But at least they're paying federal taxes. No. How much did they pay last year? Zero. So they're doing it right in front of us. They're just strip mining the wealth and the equity from the American middle class, which is the foundation of our democracy. Thomas Jefferson said, American democracy is rooted in tens of thousands of freeholds owned by individual Americans and families, each with a stake in our system, each with a stake in our economic system, and each with a stake in our democracy. If you get an aristocratic system with these huge stratifications of wealth above and widespread poverty below, then democracy is simply unsustainable. And most Americans today are making choices that they shouldn't have. 57% of Americans cannot put their hand on $1,000 if they have an emergency. If you are in that category and the engine light comes on in your car, it's the apocalypse, because you can see your life circling the drain. You can see that you're not going to be able to, you're not going to be able to pay that mechanic, and you're going to lose your car, and you're not going to be able to get to work, and you're going to lose your home. And that's what happened to all those people on the street in San Francisco. A lot of them, when you hit the street, within 3 days, you start to experience mental illness. So yeah, a lot of them went crazy. And a lot of them are drug addicts now. But they were just people like you and me who had a little string of bad luck, and then the engine light went on in their car, or two flat tires at the same time. And that's, their lives began to unravel. And, people that I sit at kitchen tables with are making choices. I talk all the time to elderly or their children who are cutting up pills to make the prescriptions, last the end of the week so they can pay for food. People paying for choosing between home eating and home food, gasoline and food. I have a kid who I talked to the other day, who said every Tuesday he makes a decision whether he's going to have a meal that day or whether he's going to buy gas for his car. So I talked to a young couple who were sitting in a apartment that they can no longer, rental apartments they can no longer afford, with a baby crying, their new baby crying in their lap, and having to decide, arguing with each other about whether the baby was $50 sick or $100 sick or $500 sick before they bring them to a hospital. So, people are making desperate decisions right now that they should never have to make in this country. And I saw President Biden when he went to Hawaii recently, and he had come back from Vietnam, and it was on 9/11, and he gave a speech about 9/11, and he said something to that during that speech that I was rather startled by, as he said that the reason that they bombed, that Osama bin Laden bombed the World Trade Center is because he hated us. They hated us for our freedoms. So this is something that, was a trope that President Bush used at that time, and it was ridiculed by Democrats. And I went on Neil Cavuto the next day, and I said, that's not true. That's propaganda. It's just not true. We know, Osama bin Laden was really clear about why he bombed the World Trade Center. He bombed it because we put 2 military bases right next to Mecca. And he said he loved the United States before that, because the United States had supported him in his war against the Russians in Afghanistan. Oh, and that he respected the United States, and that it wasn't until we put those bases next to Mecca, which is, which is offensive to Muslim people. So that's their holy land. So why would the president lie to us about that? Why would he try to say something that simply wasn't true? And I went to Poland. It made me think of this trip I made to Poland in 1964 with my dad. And I grew up at a time when, as I said, we owned half the wealth. We were the biggest exporter in the world. Everybody wanted our stuff. When I traveled with my parents abroad when I was a kid, strangers would come up to me and offer to buy my blue jeans. They wanted American transistor radios. They wanted RCA Victrolas more than anything. Everybody wanted an American car. Wherever you were in the world, our cars were the gold standard automobiles in the world. I went to Poland, as I said, in 1964 with my mother and father, a year after my uncle was killed, with my mom and dad, 3 of the older siblings. And before we went, my mother took us shopping in Washington to buy gifts for children in an orphanage in Warsaw. We were very excited about it. We brought them clothes, American toys. But when we got there, the communist government didn't want us there. My father had been invited by a Democratic activist, and they blacked out any news of our presence in Poland because they didn't want the Polish people to know we were there. And when we took these gifts to give to the little children in the orphanage, the government had come in and removed all the children. And 2 days later, we went to Krakow to visit the cardinal, who was a living saint in the Cathedral of the Black Madonna. And he had resisted communism and the communists. He had been jailed, he'd been tortured, he had endured this suffering with such extraordinary dignity and piety, and he had inspired this huge religious resurgence in the Catholic faith in Poland. So, and everybody knew that as soon as he died, he was going to be beatified by the Catholic Church. So for us little Catholic kids, to be able to meet somebody who was a living saint was the biggest thrill of our lives. When we went up the stairs, we passed through Krakow Square, which was empty, one of the biggest squares in Europe. It looked like a mile long. And we spent about 3.5 hours in the cathedral, and meeting the cardinal at the end. And when we came out, there were 1 million people waiting for us. And word had spread by word of mouth that we were there. The entire city of Krakow had emptied out and come to see us. And the embassy automobile, which we were driving in, was trapped in this sea of people and couldn't move for hours. My father hauled us up through the window onto the roof of the car. And then he gave a speech to this crowd. Then they began singing Stolat to us, which means, may you live forever. And then they started singing another song that was described to me at that time as the Polish national anthem, but it was a song that was illegal. It was an anti-communist song. It was a criminal act to sing it. And they just sang it again and again and again and again for hours. And I was a little 11-year-old kid standing on top of this car signing autographs for the first time in my life and watching people with tears flowing down their faces and just trying to get close and to touch, as some member of my family. And those are the same crowds I saw on that same trip in Germany, in France, in Italy, Greece, and England. They didn't hate us for our freedoms. They loved us for our freedoms. They looked to us for our leadership, for moral authority. And one of the reasons that they were so passionate about this is because my uncle, because he had made a decision, a strategic decision at the beginning of his administration to project economic power abroad, but not military power. To in every place that he could, to project economic power. His best friend asked him, "What do you want as the epitaph on your gravestone?" And my uncle told him, "He kept the peace." He said the primary job of a president of the United States is to keep the country out of war. He said he didn't want African children and Latin American children and Asian children, when they thought of the United States of America, to think of a man with a gun and a uniform. He wanted them to think of a Peace Corps volunteer. He wanted them to think of the Kennedy Milk Program, which gave nutrition to malnourished kids all over the world. He wanted them to think of the Alliance for Progress, of USAIDs, with the programs that he had launched to put America on the side of the poor, to end run the oligarchs, end run the military dictatorships, go directly to the poor and try to grow middle classes in countries all over, because that was the foundation stone of democracy. And 3 days before he took office, I was at his inauguration. I was at the Democratic Convention in 1960. But 3 days before his inauguration, on my birthday, January 17th, 1961, President Eisenhower gave his farewell speech, which today we have to look back and say was the most important speech in American history, because he warned us against the emergence of a military-industrial complex. That would transform America, which was supposed to be the world's exemplary democracy, the city on the hill, the lamp to all the nations. It would transform us from a democracy into an imperial nation abroad, an imperium, and a national security state, a garrison state, a surveillance state at home. And my uncle, 4 months after he came into office, encountered that full force of that, during the Bay of Pigs invasion, when the CIA lied to him and the Joint Chiefs lied to him, and he took the blame when those men were dying on the beach. He took public blame for the Bay of Pigs, but he said privately to his aides, "I want to take the CIA and shatter it into 1,000 pieces." He fired Alan Dulles, and he fired Charles Cabell, and he fired Richard Bissell, the 3 top guys at the CIA. And then he refused to go to war. He refused to send any combat troop abroad during his administration. They were desperate that he send them to Laos. They consider him a traitor when he settled that war with the Russians without firing a shot. They tried to get him into Cuba in 61, Cuba again during the missile crisis in 62, Berlin in 62 with the Checkpoint Charlie crisis. And then, of course, Vietnam, his closest aides, the people he trusted and loved, General Max Taylor, Averell Harriman, Bob McNamara, and others said to him, "You got to send 250,000 troops to Vietnam or the government is going to collapse." And he said, it's their government and it's got to be their fight. We can help them. We can't fight it for them. It's not our war. And he did end up sending 16,000 advisors, mainly Green Berets, who weren't supposed to be participating in combat. Many of them did. And in October 22nd, 1963, he heard a Green Beret had died, and he asked Walt Rostow for a full casualty list. And when Rostow gave it to him, there were 75 Americans who had died already in Vietnam. And he said, that's too many, we're bringing him home. And that afternoon, he signed National Security Order 263, ordering all troops home from Vietnam, all military personnel by 1965, with the first 1,000 coming home in December 1963, so a month and a half later. 30 days after he signed that, he was murdered. And a week later, President Johnson remanded the order and sent 250,000 troops over. And my dad my dad ran against Johnson, was murdered himself on a peace platform. Martin Luther King, who by then had become a peace activist, was murdered 2 months earlier. And Nixon became president, sent 560,000 Americans over there. 56,000 never came home, including my cousin, George Skakel, who died in the Tet Offensive. And, that trauma, those series of traumas, the death of my dad, my uncle, my father, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, who was also a peace activist at that time, the Vietnam War, 9/11, and then the COVID crisis, this parade of traumas pushed our nation further and further down that path to becoming what Eisenhower warned us against, a surveillance state at home and a military state abroad. And, we're seeing that today, and we're all beginning to understand that the function of the intelligence agencies is simply to provide us with a constant pipeline of new wars and feed the military-industrial complex. So we spent $8 trillion on wars since 2001. Here's what we got for the Iraq War, which is half of that cost. Iraq is worse off than we found it. We killed more Iraqis than Saddam Hussein. We killed between 650,000 and 1 million. Today, Iraq is in an incoherent battle between Shia and Sunni death squads. We pushed Iraq into a proxy posture with Iran, which is exactly the foreign policy outcome we've been trying to avoid. We created ISIS. We drove 2 million refugees up into Europe. And that ended up with Brexit. And the riots that are happening right now in France are a direct result of, ultimately of our blowback from the Iraq War and the Syrian War. So, but we spent $8 trillion on it. And now we're putting another $113 billion in March to Ukraine, a war that could have easily been settled. The Russians tried twice to settle it on terms that were very, very beneficial to us. In both cases, we forced Zelensky to sabotage those agreements. It's a war that shouldn't have happened, that could have been solved with diplomacy. We committed $113 billion. And and now both both Republican Democratic Party leadership with the White House has approved another $24 billion. And this is endless. This will go on for decades. So, when we committed this money, the first $113 billion tranche, in March, that same month, we cut Medicare to 15 million Americans. We took away their health care. And we took away food stamps. We cut food stamps to 30 million Americans from $283 a month to $23 a month. I was in a food kitchen yesterday in Flint, and people are starving in this country. And so but that same month also, the Fed printed $300 billion unanticipated dollars to bail out the Silicon Valley Bank. So when the bankers need it, and when the military-industrial complex needs it, we got plenty. We got all they need. Just incidentally, the entire budget for EPA is $12 billion. That's all we got for the environment in this country. For our Purple Mountains majesties, for our lakes, our rivers, the streams, that's it. We're sending 12 times that to Ukraine. We got CDC is $12 billion, they don't spend it very well, but, I'm gonna change that. Anyway, when Mitch McConnell asked that month, March of 2022, can we really afford to send 113 billion to Ukraine? He said, don't worry, because it's not really going to Ukraine. It's going to US military contractors. The General Dynamics, to Raytheon, to Boeing and Lockheed. So it's really just coming back for us. He acknowledged that it was a money laundering scheme for the military industrial complex. Well, who do you think owns every one of those companies? Yeah, Blackrock. And I saw Tim Scott the other night on the Republican debate, where they were all talking. Vivek was questioning the war. He's the only one there that was questioning. All the other ones were saying, no, this is great, and then after we do this, we're going to go to war on Mexico, and then we're going to go war on China. And Tim Scott said, you don't understand. It's not a gift. We're not giving it to Ukraine. It's a loan. They got to pay it back. Oh, how many of you think any part of that is going to be paid back? Nobody. You're right. It's not. So why do we call it a loan? Everybody knows it's not ever intended to be paid back. We call it a loan because when you call it a loan, you can impose conditions on the person that you loan it to. So they impose, the aid package is filled with conditions, very onerous, burdensome conditions. A lot of them have to do with an austerity program in Ukraine to make sure no poor people in Ukraine get any money at all. And that the education systems and everything else is bankrupted. But also, it requires Ukrainian government to sell its assets. So if Ukrainian government owns ports or roads or airports or whatever, it's now going to sell those to big corporations, multinational corporations. The most important thing is it requires Ukraine to sell its farmland. So Ukraine's farmland is the richest farmland in the world. It is the breadbasket of Europe. There's been 1,000 years of wars fought over that farmland. It said, people joke that if you throw a boob on the ground in Ukraine, something will grow that you can eat because it's so fertile. So everybody wants that farmland. And now, since the beginning of the war, 30% of it has been sold. Most of it to Cargill, DuPont, and Monsanto. And who do you think owns all of those companies? Blackrock, right? So Cargill is privately owned, but there is one other stakeholder, which is a major stakeholder, which is Blackrock. The rest of them are, is the major owner, Blackrock and Vanguard, which own each other, are the owners. So like I said, they're doing it right in front of us. The CEO of Blackrock, Larry Fink, is on the board of the World Economic Forum. And they, when they gather, they gather in Davos. They call the Billionaires Boys Club, gathers in Davos once a year to plan what the world will look like for the rest of humanity. And they call that vision the Great Reset. And when he was asked, what does the Great Reset really mean for us? And Klaus Schwab, who's the director of World Economic Forum, said it means that you will own nothing and you will be happy. So they're on their way to do at least the first part of that. They're going to own everything, and we're going to become renters. We're going to become borrowers. They're going to commoditize humanity. We're going to become serfs on our own land. And when they had the debate the other night, nobody was talking about these things. What they talk about is the issues that divide us all. The issues of, and they're important issues of guns, abortion, of trans rights, of immigration or whatever, but they're all very, they're culture war issues that keep us all at each other's throats. And that we know, unsolvable in the political process. It's just a constant conflict. And at least the conventional political process. So it's and none of them are talking about what's really happening in our country, the level of desperation, the disintegration, these rises in suicides and alcoholism and addiction that are debilitating our community. The only solution they have, the fentanyl crisis, is we're going to go to war with Mexico. So it's all things about conflict that escalate the conflicts between blacks and whites and Republicans and Democrats and natives and immigrants in this country, and we're all at each other's throats all the time, and it's all being exasperated by our political leadership. And you know, when the king and queen look over the balustrades of their castle and they see all of their subjects fighting each other, they go back to the big feast and they pop champagne corks because they know nobody's going to come over the wall for them to take back their stuff. And what I'm trying to do with this campaign is to get us to stop fighting each other so we can go over that wall. I'm going to talk really briefly about one of my programs, then I'm going to let you ask questions. But, you know, we kicked off the great prosperity in this country with that 50-year period with a housing boom. And when I go back into office, I'm going to do everything I can to initiate a new housing boom. And one of the things I'm going to do is create a new class of mortgages that are available to single-family home buyers for 3% interest. And I'm going to do that without driving up the debt, which we need to stop doing. I'm going to do it by, you know that if you have a rich uncle and he'll co-sign your mortgage for you, that you can get a much better rate because the bank is basing their interest rates to you not on your lousy credit rating, but on your uncle's superb credit rating. So I'm going to give everybody a rich uncle, which is Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam to co-sign the mortgage. If you default, the house goes to Uncle Sam, and it's, you know, and no foul. And you know, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae did that, and they ended up with a lot of houses, and now they have a $110 billion surplus that's sitting in a bank, which I'm also going to use to get people into homes. I'm going to finance it by selling T-bills at 3% zero interest to finance this program, so the market will finance it rather than the taxpayer. And I'm going to give the first $500,000 of these to teachers because that's the most important profession. We need to start supporting them because we need to focus on our schools and making sure that they have homes nearby and that they're they're part of communities and that we're all working together to build communities. So I'm going to, I want to, look, I know how to unravel what's happening on Capitol Hill. How can I say that? I've spent 40 years suing the corporations that now own our government and suing the regulatory agencies. I've sued almost all the regulatory agencies, DOT. I'm now effectively in litigation with them, with USDA on multiple occasions, which is supposed to help family farmers and give us nutritious food and does the opposite. I've sued EPA more times than I can count, NIH, CDC, FDA. I just went. When you sue these agencies, you get a PhD in how to unravel the corruption. It makes you understand how did this happen? Why are these people acting the way they're doing? The opposite of what they're supposed to be doing. Why? I know all of you have had questions about government policies that make no sense. And then, you know, if you see them up close, you understand how it happens. A lot of it is perverse incentives. A lot of it is just personnel who should not be running. I mean, you know, when I sued Monsanto, in the discovery process, we uncovered emails, years and years of emails between the director of the pesticide division at EPA, a man named Jess Rowland. I always like to repeat his name because I don't think he should sleep easy. And the heads of Monsanto. And it turns out we were paying him for all these decades, but he was actually secretly working for Monsanto, and they were telling him, you gotta kill this study, you gotta falsify science here. They were doing everything they could because they knew that Roundup caused cancer. And they were just trying to keep that science off the books. And at one point they said to him, we need you to kill a study that's being done by an entirely different agency, ATSDR. And he said to them, well, that's not even my agency. I don't have any supervision, but I'm gonna kill it. And you have to give me a gold medal when I do that. So, you know, unfortunately, Jess Rowland is the template. He is not the exception. He is the rule. There are people like that in almost all of the agencies. And I know their names in many cases, and I understand how they act. And I'm gonna move them out very, very quickly and put people. I can do this, you know, but I can't do it on my own. I said in my announcement speech that if you give me a sword and some ground to stand on, I'll take your country back for you. But I need your help. I need you. I need you. Go to Kennedy24.com, volunteer, send $5 if you can. If you can't do that, volunteer. Whatever you do, spread the word, wear a Kennedy t-shirt, wear a Kennedy hat, put a bumper sticker, put a lawn sign up, get people talking about it. We did a poll recently in Michigan, and you know, there's a lot of people who don't know that I'm running. So the more, I know it's crazy. I know I had to fire half the people who worked for me. Just kidding. But you know, we need to spread the word. So get out there and you know, and we'll see you all on the barricades. And thank you very, very much for your support.
Chronic pain patients have been under attack by the federal government for a good long decade now, just for needing the medicine that makes them feel they could get through the day. How will you help chronic pain patients?
Yeah, I mean, I can't, you know, I'd like to hear from you what you think I should be doing. You know, and how we, because I think one of the honest dilemmas that FDA had was how do you make drugs available, particularly opiates, to chronic pain patients without making it, you know, without starting a nationwide epidemic of opiates. So I would love, and you know, Stephanie will, if you have ideas about how to thread that needle, I would love to hear them, because I think that is one of the genuine dilemmas that, you know, we have to figure out how to deal with that. So if you write your information, if you have an idea about that, about how to solve it, I'd like to hear it. And you know, if you can contact us, or give her your information, and we'll contact you and talk to you about it. Thanks.
Yes, on that same front, about alternative care for medical and health issues, being able to go to a doctor when you really need to go to a doctor, and feeling like you can trust them to do what you want done instead of what their system says to be done. And along with that, getting insurance companies and Medicare to pay for alternate care that might help you.
I mean, it's not just that it's not covered. There's an active war on natural health, and I'm going to change that. I know I can change that. I'm going to, my first week in office, I'm going to go down to NIH, and I'm going to get all the employees, and I'm going to just say, and I'm going to say some nice things to them about government service, et cetera, but I'm also just going to say, you know, they have a $42 billion budget that they distribute to 56,000 scientists. And what do those scientists do? They do mainly two things. They study infectious disease and how to make new ones, which is crazy. And I mean, how insane is that they're doing that still? And then the other thing they do is they develop, they incubate drugs for the pharmaceutical companies to treat the chronic disease epidemic that they helped start. My uncle was president, 6% of the country had chronic disease. In 1986, 11.8% had chronic disease. By 2006, 54%. And we don't know how many today because NIH stopped publishing that data. A study came out that said about 2 weeks ago, that 1 out of every 7 kids now has autoimmune disease. That's not normal. We have the highest chronic disease burden in the world. And we know it's coming from an environmental toxin, or, you know, a lot of them. Because genes don't cause epidemics. They may provide a vulnerability, but you need an environmental toxin. And we're the sickest country in the world. We have the highest chronic disease burden, and we have, our kids are the sickest generation. You know, we've gone from just autism alone, 1 in 10,000, and my generation today, now 1 in 10,000 people, you're not gonna see 69-year-old men walking around with a non-toilet trained, non-verbal, head-banging, stimming, toe walking. I've never seen it. Right? But, you know, 1 out of every 34 of our kids look like that. Something happened. And all the lies they say that, oh, we just didn't notice it before, have been proven again and again to be baloney. Why aren't we asking that question? What is happening? Why did peanut allergies suddenly appear in 1989? Why did eczema appear suddenly in 1989 and go epidemic? And, you know, all these autoimmune disease, rheumatoid arthritis, juvenile diabetes, Crohn's. Who ever heard of Crohn's disease? Our age? Nobody. What about, or lupus? All of these suddenly appear, all of them around 1989. What happened? Okay, and why is nobody, those 56,000 scientists, why is nobody asking that most important question? And by the way, during COVID, we had the worst body count on earth. I don't know why. We have 16% of the COVID deaths in our country. We only have 4.2% of the globe's population. Why are people getting awards for how they handled COVID? Right? We literally did worse than anybody on earth. The CDC says, well, the reason all these people died was not because of bad management, which definitely it was part of it, but they all have chronic disease. And they had the average person, this is according to CDC, the average American who died from COVID had 3.8 chronic diseases. So they had obesity, they had diabetes, they had asthma, and one other thing, right? That's the average. Some of them had 10. So, and nobody else has that in the world. So what happened to our country? You know, and what you can say is, it wasn't COVID that was killing. It was chronic disease. It was bad health. And, you know, the COVID pushed them off the cliff. But it was the chronic disease that walked them up to the top of the mountain and put them right on the edge of the cliff where they could be pushed off. And why do we spend trillions and trillions on COVID and not a penny on finding out what that was? I'm going to change that.
Oh, hello, Mr. Kennedy. I'm part of the exodus from California. My family grew up in California as farm workers, and my family was with your father in Delano when he went to meet with Cesar Chavez to try to get him to eat again. So we also walked when we were boycotting lettuce, grapes, because the farm workers didn't even have any toilets or water or couldn't take any breaks. But anyway, with all that said, things have obviously changed. My three sons are still in California. One recently bought a home, a used home, nothing fantabulous, nothing custom, for $600,000. My other son and my daughter-in-law have great paying jobs. They can't afford to buy a home. So my question is, oh, and also, I spoke to my son this morning, and gasoline is $6. Gasoline is $6 a gallon.
Yeah, I paid $7.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my question is, what do you plan to do with the inflation and as far as gas prices?
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that story. And, inflation, and anybody who says they have an instantaneous solution for inflation is just not being realistic. What we've got to do is we've got to cut our costs so that we don't continue to add to it. And one of the ways to do that, I'm going to cut $500 billion from the military budget. That's not going to get us there completely, but there's a lot of other things. You can go to our website that I'm going to do. One of the things is, for 25 years, the GAO has done a report every year identifying the most wasteful programs in government, and some of this stuff is just insane that they do. It's crazy. And they're programs that just don't do anything but go on year after year. So they have that, and those big, thick studies go on a shelf, and that's it. They do it every year. So I'm going to do like a base closing commission that they had, back and when we ran down the Cold War, and I'm going to get them to go through all of those studies and identify the worst of those programs, the ones that are the least politically volatile, that everybody can look at them and nobody's going to stand up and defend them. And then I'm going to put them all in one bill, send it to Congress, and ask for an up or down vote on all of them. And I think that is a way that everybody says they're going to eliminate waste, but this is actually something that I think will work. Oh, that's right. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to end the chronic disease epidemic. And that sounds like a lofty promise, but what I've said to people, if I get to year 4 of my presidency and I haven't dramatically dropped the level of chronic disease in this country, you shouldn't vote for me again. Oh, and we know there are environmental exposures, and people say, okay, here's a list of them, of the biggest culprits. PFOAs, which are flame retardants, which follow the timeline. You have to think of something that became ubiquitous in the American population around 1989, mid-90s, that affected every demographic from Cubans in Key Biscayne to Inuit in Alaska. And that, for a long time, it affected the neurological illnesses that it caused: ADD, ADHD, speech delayed, language delayed, tics, Tourette syndrome, narcolepsy, ASD, autism, and all the others. That there's a 4-to-1 ratio of boys to girls. So what is a toxin? There are toxins that affect boys and not girls, and there are the opposite kind. So you can identify the toxin, and there's only a narrow list of exposures. PFOAs is one of those. Glyphosate is, another one which is in Roundup, which became ubiquitous at that time. Atrazine, neonicotinoid pesticides, high fructose corn syrup, cell phone radiation, and there's a bunch of other ones. So, but it's a limited number, and it's a very easy thing to do those studies. And then you'll say, well, how do you get rid of some of these because they're popular products? And I'll tell you how you do it is you do enough science on it. And once the science is there, like if high fructose corn syrup is causing the obesity epidemic or the diabetes epidemic, it's not a good thing. No matter how powerful that industry is, we need to eliminate it. But the government and my administration probably won't have the power to just banish it. But what you can do is you can do real science on it. And once you get 8, 10, 12, 15 studies, then the trial lawyers do it for you. That's what we did with Monsanto. The government in a million years could not ban Roundup. But if you have enough science that they can sue and say, we went from 6% obese and 13% overweight when my uncle was president to 47% obese and 75% overweight today. It's not because Americans suddenly became lazy or kids became lazy. They're being poisoned. They're being mass poisoned. And, we need, when we find out the culprits, we're going to do the science on it, and we're going to let the law do the rest.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and then Sophie.
Hi, Mr. Kennedy. In 1992, the late great Ross Perot warned against NAFTA when both the Republican George Herbert Walker Bush and Bill Clinton came to this state and promised not one job would leave this state. Well, all our jobs left. And I want to know, what are you going to do to bring our jobs back home to Michigan? Because the giant sucking sound continues, and it cannot continue any longer.
Yeah, we were promised that globalization was going to help the American worker, and that was, I'm not sure it was a lie, but it was not, it's turned out for sure not to be true. And all I can say is, I lived at a time when the American worker made America the greatest nation on earth, and that's not just hyperbole. By all these different metrics, we were the moral authority everybody looked to. We had the leadership in the world. We had the wealthiest population, the largest middle class. I know what that looks like, and everything I do when we renegotiate these treaties, everything I do is going to be about restoring that, the American worker to primacy in this country, and that's all I can tell you. Yeah. Thanks. I think we're going to.
What are you going to do about the border and the fentanyl and the sex trafficking and all that, please?
All right, let me answer that one question about the border. Oh, I visit the border, and I spent days there talking to people, and the good news is it's solvable. The bad news is what's happening there right now is insane. There's 10,000 people coming across a day. I watched, when I was there, I went between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning to a gap in the wall at Yuma. It's a gap that should have been sealed. It was about to be sealed. Metal is sitting on the ground right next to it. And when the Biden administration came in, they ordered them not to construct it. It's really crazy. Oh, I watched 300 people come across. They were arriving 55 at a time in buses owned by the Mexican drug cartel, like big, shiny white buses. They all knew exactly what would happen because the cartels are advertising all over the world, on TikTok, on YouTube, and telling people, you send us 10,000 or 15,000, and we'll get you across the border. And they knew they get the first 110 that came across were young men from West Africa. And I did not talk to them because the Border Patrol was processing them. But the second 2 buses that came the third and fourth bus that came across were people from, I talked to every one of them. They were from Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, Tibet, Nepal, and there were only 2 families the whole night that were from Latin America, one from Peru, one from Colombia. They were also the only one that told me they had asylum claims. They were fleeing from drug cartels, and were scared for their lives. So they have a legitimate claim. All the other ones said, I'm here to work. So they don't have any legitimate claim to cross that border. And they have to, if they want that, they have to come in the legal way. And I'm for, by the way, wide gates that make it much easier to come in, get citizenship, make sure we have the workforce we need. But I'm not for, just letting the cartels run our immigration policy. There's 7 million people, and all of the sort of liberal Democrats, and I consider myself a liberal Democrat, but liberal Democrats who think they're doing a humanitarian favor for people, it is exactly the opposite. Everybody we talked to had been exploited, extorted. Some of them had been raped. Some of them, the Peruvian family was robbed of everything, a lifetime saving, beaten. I went to a rape center that the people of Yuma built. These very kind Americans had built to treat the huge numbers of women and children who are raped right before they come across. There's a tree that we could see from the fence that they call the rape tree, where the cartels extract the final payment. And it's the most horrific thing that I've ever seen. The people of Yuma were so kind, but they're being crushed by this. And I spent a day at the hospital. The hospital spent $27 million unreimbursed last year treating migrants that nobody's going to pay for. The local people are having to pay for that and then at one point the hospital administrator told me at 32 of the 35 beds on the maternity ward were occupied by migrant women having babies, and they had to turn away local women who had appointments for, to induce their pregnancy for C-sections, etc. So, and this is happening all over our country now. Those, when they come across, they're fingerprinted. If they don't have a criminal record, they're brought to the Yuma airport, and they're put on a plane to any destination they want in our country. Any destination they want, and if they don't have the money to pay for the ticket, the Border Patrol buys a ticket and then FEMA reimburses them. So you and I are paying for those tickets to them fly anywhere in our country. 7 million have come across in 3 years. During that period, only 3.1 legal immigrants. 3.1 million legal immigrants. So it doubled. The cartels are bringing two times what the legal immigration is in the United States, and it's crushing our social service system. There's 110,000 have landed in New York. They're sleeping on the streets. When they come across, they're given a trial date at the asylum courts 7 years in the future. And they're here for 7 years. They have no legal status, so they can't legally work. So they're preyed upon by unscrupulous employers who are giving them, $7, $6, $7, $8, $10 an hour to work on construction sites in New York or to do other jobs. And meanwhile, the guys who are the construction, the companies that knowingly hire these migrants are bidding for the same jobs as the union shop. So they're underbidding them, by 20 or 30%. And you're rewarding the worst employers. And now you pay them $10 an hour, you can't get off the street for $10 an hour. So they're still living on the sidewalks. There's now encampments that they're putting. New York has spent $1.1 billion this year putting people in hotels. When the winter comes and they can freeze to death, it's going to get much worse. Right now they're putting them on encampments in Randall's Island, which are the playing fields for New York public schools. So these kids, the kids in New York, who were, we just destroyed this generation during COVID. What we did to them during COVID is inexcusable. But, a lot of these kids weren't allowed to play. New York City school children weren't allowed to play sports for 2.5 years. And now, and a lot of them were scholarship track, so their whole lives are now, messed with. And now they can't play sports because there's migrants camped on the field. Eric Adams, who originally said New York is a sanctuary city, is now saying we need $12.5 billion or New York is dead. So it's not a good idea. This lady talked about Cesar Chavez. My father was very, very close to Cesar, and I worked with Cesar Chavez during the last 2 decades of his life, mainly on pesticide issues which disproportionately harm Hispanic farm workers. I was privileged that his family asked me to be a pallbearer when he died in 1993. So, but Cesar had 2 issues during that last 2 decades of his life. One was pesticides, and the other was the border. He wanted the border closed because he understood that all of the migrants coming across were dampening his capacity to leverage good, conditions and pay for his workers. And, and the fact that, my party has forgotten those values and is now twisting it in a way that, if you think that illegal immigration, if you think the border shouldn't be wide open to 10,000 immigrants a day, that you're a racist or you're a, xenophobe. That's not right. I mean, anybody who understands the humanitarian crisis that this policy has caused would be, should be angry about it. So, let me just tell you one thing. You can shut it down overnight. You can, and I will do that. The main thing is, the big thing that everybody said, you need to have adequate asylum judges so that you can adjudicate the cases before anybody crosses the border. Once they step a foot onto U.S. land, they have a right to be here until they're fully adjudicated. So you have to do it on the other side of the border, and that's what they used to do. And and have enough asylum so you can do it right then and there. And 99.99999% of those people will be turned away immediately because they don't have, they'll stop coming, which ends the crisis and the hazards to them of, what happens to their kids when they walk from, from Nicaragua or from Mexico or whatever. The other thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to say this because this is sort of an elegant solution that solves a whole lot of problems. The day I get into office, I'm going to order at the State Department waive the fee for passport cards to any American who says they can't afford them. So passport cards are issued, which is a passport, but it's just a card. It's a government-issued photo ID that serves as a passport if you want to go to Canada or Mexico. You don't need the whole book. It's a card. And it has your picture on it. It does not keep your vaccine information, your health information. And it's not mandatory. But I'm going to make it so they're easily accessible at every post office. Right now, you get them at the post office. Anybody can walk into their local post office and get one of these cards. And then it shows that they're an American citizen. If you don't have, a lot of people, Democrats worry because a lot of their constituents don't have photo IDs. If you're black, you live in an urban area, high numbers never get a driver's license. High numbers of elderly have lost their driver's license. High numbers of students don't have license. So when they hear Republicans say, we want photo ID at the voting booth, what they're thinking is, and most of my constituents, or a large part of my constituents, won't be able to vote. So this solves this problem. Because now everybody can vote and everybody can show an ID. And I have, this idea now has the support of Al Sharpton, of Andrew Young, of all the top civil rights leaders. In fact, a group of them went to President Biden about a month ago and begged him to do this. And they said, we can drop all our objections to requiring voting ID at the voting booth if we do this, if we have this available. And President Biden wouldn't do it. So, but here's the other problem it solves. It solves the border overnight. Because right now, if you're an employer, you're not allowed to hire an illegal alien. But the only thing you're required to do is to ask for their social security card. Social security card has no picture on it. They're easily forged. They're passed from hand to hand. And all the employers know this guy is not, he doesn't have a driver's license. We know he's not, he's a young man with no driver's license. Of course, he's not legal. They know it. But all they have to do is check the box and they know they won't be prosecuted. Now we change that. We say you cannot hire anybody in this country till they show you a passport ID. And that overnight, the border will dry out. Because all of those people are coming for jobs. If you put a single employer in jail for hiring an illegal alien, it all ends overnight, and the border dries up, and we do it in a way that Republicans and Democrats don't agree to. Anyway, thank you all again very much.